So from here on out, the words that I use in my signs are not my own. They are taken from Talila Lewis. It was from her transcript, and I've brought it into ASL for you all. So up to this point, I've been explaining some information for you guys, and maybe you've been looking at it and kind of wondering how you should take it. Well, now I'm going to explain some very important and serious information for you all. I've noticed something happens whenever deaf and deafblind and deaf and hard of hearing and deaf disabled persons are jailed. Really, they are innocent. So they are wrongfully imprisoned. And I'm looking at all these situations, and I found this one commonality with all of them. So whenever a deaf and hard of hearing or deafblind or deaf disabled person is innocent, the problem occurs when they're interacting with the police. Sometimes, especially if the policeman can sign, that often leads to wrongful imprisonment. I will explain on that in a minute. So when you interact with the police who can sign, their signing might be very basic, like maybe they know the alphabet, or maybe they know some very basic signs, or they could sign pretty naturally. They might even be a coda, so they could sign very fluently. But regardless, often whenever the deaf interact with the police, they are wrongfully imprisoned, even when they are innocent. I'm now going to explain what the problem is when you interact with the signing police. There could just be a miscommunication, even if you're doing everything as you should. There could be a miscommunication that leads to more serious jail time or longer sentence. And it's all because you talked with the signing police officer. I'd like to warn you that most police departments will have often one hearing police officer whose responsibility it is to interact with the deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind community. But you have to understand that the police departments as a whole have never really hired a deaf person to come and educate them. It's often the hearing police officer's responsibility to go out and reach out to the deaf and deafblind community. And I've noticed that's become a bit of a problem, because what happens is we, as the deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind communities, we notice someone who can sign, and so we start oversharing, but that can be damaging to us. Whenever the police interact with the deaf and deafblind community, you have to remember they are not your friend. They might be friendly, but they are not your friend. They are looking for a reason to imprison you. And that's something really significant that I've seen show up. It's very problematic. The police departments will often say, "Oh, good for us. We have a person who can communicate with the deaf and deafblind community. Great." But it's not really that great. I want you all to completely understand that when you interact with signing police officers, it can be dangerous for you. So you, as a deafblind or hard of hearing or deaf disabled person, are brought to prison or are brought to the police station for questioning. I would really highly suggest that you do not overexpose any information. You don't just start sharing your whole story. Regardless whether you are innocent or maybe you're partly innocent, partly guilty, or maybe you're just full-on guilty. You might even just be confused about what's going on, but regardless of your status, you cannot overshare with the police, because that can be very dangerous for you. So maybe when you're sitting and talking with the police, they're friendly, maybe they can sign pretty well, and you're feeling nervous, you don't really know what to do. Oh, you see someone signing and it's very relaxing. But regardless, you have to remember they are not my friend. Anything that you say to the police could lead to more serious consequences. You have several rights when interacting with the police. The first is to a skilled and neutral interpreter, and the second is to a lawyer. You have both of those rights. So if you're talking with the police and they bring in a lawyer, but there is no interpreter there yet, just wait. Likewise, if there's an interpreter, that's great, but if there's no lawyer, you have to wait. You have to wait for both of them to come. You need the interpreter and the lawyer to be there. Those are your rights. Let's say it happens that the police arrest you and you are brought to jail and they start interrogating you. I highly encourage you to follow these 4 steps and memorize them to the letter. You have to say, I am deaf, or I am deaf-blind, I am deaf hard of hearing, I'm deaf disabled, whatever you identify as, tell the police that. Secondly, you have to say, I require. It's important to use that term, require. You can't just say, I want, or I need, or I would like. You have to say, I require a lawyer. Third, you have to say, I require an interpreter, and they have to be qualified and skilled. And if you like, you could say, I would want them to be a deaf interpreter. And whether or not they provide one for you is another area, but you could say that you like that. Fourth, you can say, I choose to stay silent. That is your right to stay silent until both the interpreter and the lawyer arrive. Now, naturally, after you respectfully say those 4 things, you can just drop your hands and stay silent. And it protects yourself, it really does. And the police might be friendly, they might be really sweet, they might even be handsome or beautiful. They might even be a coda, they could sign very well. You may have even seen the policeman at like a community event or a school, or maybe they gave a presentation on something. It doesn't matter. You have to remember they are not your friend. They are not on your side, they aren't supporting you. You have to draw that line and stay silent until the interpreter and the lawyer arrive. Now, sometimes it will happen when you're interacting with the police. The police could say, oh hey, I'm going to call on this other policeman, he can sign, and he can be your so-called interpreter. No, you can't accept that. Because now you just have 2 policemen in the room with you. Maybe the policeman has a friend that he's going to call, and the friend comes and the friend starts interpreting for you, but he's not qualified. You need to wait until they actually get a qualified, skilled, and neutral interpreter. And you have to wait until the lawyer arrives. If you're chatting with the police with the interpreter involved, you really need to stop. You have to wait for your lawyer to come as well. Let's say the policeman leaves the room and you're just chatting with the lawyer or with the interpreter, you need to stop yourself. You have to have the lawyer there as well. Now, I know that in these situations it can be very nerve-wracking, you can be very confused about what's going to happen, and it's very easy that whenever you see the policeman signing or you see the interpreter signing, you get very relaxed and you start oversharing accidentally. But, as I said before, that's very dangerous. It's better to just say these 4 things. I am deaf, I require a lawyer, I require an interpreter, and I choose to stay silent. And then when the lawyer and the interpreter arrive, then you can go ahead and talk with your lawyer and figure out a plan. The plan could be to go ahead and cooperate with the police, or it could be to stay silent. It depends on your lawyer. Now, policemen are very good at buttering you up and getting you stuck between a rock and a hard place. to where it feels that you have to go ahead and just tell everything. But you need to understand the police are allowed to lie. They know when you're feeling nervous that people tend to overshare, and when that happens, there could be miscommunication, you could overexpose yourself, and you could end up being jailed, even when you're innocent. You really have to stay silent and stay strong in your decision. After you say these 4 things, again, that I am deaf, I require a lawyer, I require an interpreter, and I choose to stay silent, you just go ahead and wait. And one of 2 things can happen when you're waiting. The first is that the police say, you know what, go on home. In which case, good for you, you get to leave. And in the second situation, you have to wait until your lawyer and interpreter arrives. But you have to really make sure that your lawyer is legitimate. You have to ask for their business card, because as I said before, the cops are allowed to lie. So you have to see proof that the lawyer is a legitimate lawyer, and then you can go ahead and talk with them. Now, again, I really want to make sure you all remember this, that when you're waiting and the interpreter arrives, let's say the policeman leaves for some reason, and the interpreter is there, you may often be tempted to just overspill or overshare, but remember that the interpreter could tell the lawyer or the policeman what you say, or you could be being recorded without knowing it. The interpreter may tell the policeman what you say, so remember, do not talk with the interpreter. And if the interpreter and the policeman are in the room, do not share with them, wait for your lawyer. You may think that if you cooperate with the police, they'll help you, but that's not true. Many people think, oh, well, I'll work with them and they're going to help me, right? That's never the case, though. What usually happens is that their cooperation leads to more serious consequences, such as being wrongfully imprisoned or being imprisoned with a longer sentence. So you can in fact make the situation worse. You may be worried about money. You may be unsure of how you're going to pay for the lawyer. The police department is required to provide a lawyer for you. They will pay that fee. Now sometimes when you're sitting with the police and you start writing back and forth, I have to warn you, you gotta be careful with what you write. In fact, I encourage you to not write anything at all. But the policeman may write down, oh, we called in an interpreter, so they're coming, but it's gonna be a long wait. So why don't we just go ahead and start our process now and you can get out of here sooner. You really shouldn't follow that because they're just trying to fool you. What it means is that they may not have called an interpreter at all, or they have called one, but now they're trying to take advantage of the situation and ask you while you're alone. So even if you have to wait a long time, you just gotta stay patient and hold it together and stay strong in your choice to stay silent. While you're waiting, you may end up needing some medicine. For example, if you have diabetes and you have low blood sugar and you need a shot of insulin, or maybe you have breathing problems and you need your inhaler, you can go ahead and write that down, something like inhaler or diabetes. Just something short and sweet. And the policeman will know that they need to get your medicine, and they'll take care of your medicinal needs. But after you get your medicine, you just stay silent until the interpreter and the lawyer arrive. And then you can go ahead and talk with your lawyer about what to do. You may end up getting tired throughout the waiting process, or you may get hungry. It can be very nerve-wracking to be in this situation. You could have other things that you need to do, errands that you need to run. But regardless of what else is going on, you have to stay resilient, and you need to stay silent. Because if you go ahead and start telling your story, you could be wrongfully imprisoned, even when you are completely innocent. Or you could have more serious consequences, such as a longer jail time, and that's not fair. So again, I really want to drive this point home. It doesn't matter if you are innocent or partially innocent, or completely guilty, or you don't know what's going on at all. It doesn't matter. When you are sitting with the police and the police are signing, maybe they're a coda, so they're signing very well, or they're a beginning signer, you cannot sign with them. You cannot explain what happened, don't write anything down, don't gesture, don't do anything until you say those 4 things of I am deaf, I require an interpreter, I require a lawyer, and I choose to stay silent. And then whenever the lawyer and the interpreter both arrive, then you can go ahead and talk with your lawyer and create a plan. If the lawyer is not there yet, but the interpreter is, do not talk with the interpreter. You have to wait until the lawyer comes. That's very important that you completely understand what all is happening around you, so you don't have a miscommunication, and you are not labeled as guilty even when there was just a little misinformation going on. If you are a survivor or a victim, and you are the one who calls the police, you really have to be careful when signing with the police, and you should wait for an interpreter. Because if you start explaining the situation and you get upset, maybe you get emotional, maybe you're scared, the police could misjudge that. They could easily, they could see you as the victim signing and kind of freaking out, and they could assume that you are the cause of the problem. And they could blame you. Just because you look like you're angry, or you look really emotional, out of control, when really you're just upset and frightened. So they could be confused and arrest you when they should be arresting the actual perpetrator. They could arrest the wrong person because they misunderstood your signing. So you really need to wait for an interpreter. And the policeman is never a qualified interpreter. They need to bring in some other neutral interpreter completely disassociated from the police. And that will be your qualified neutral interpreter, who can facilitate communication and knows the deaf and hearing cultures very well, and that is your right. So let's say the policemen are misinformed about something, there's a misunderstanding going on, maybe they assume some wrong information, and the case goes to trial. The policeman will never admit, oh, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, that's my bad. No, they'll keep it quiet. So it means you're stuck. Because the court isn't going to believe you. The court's going to believe the policeman. So it's too late for you, you're going back to prison. You're up a creek. And you have to understand the transition from jail time to civilian life is very difficult. You have to protect yourself. Remember that you have rights. Again, those 4 things that you should tell the police are: number 1, I am deaf. Number 2, I require an interpreter. Number 3, I require a lawyer. And number 4, I choose to stay silent.